Good evening, good morning, wherever you may be. Streaming to you from the East Coast to the left coast and around the world on UCY.tv. This is All Things Apocalyptic with me, G. Michael Hopf. Well, all right, guys, another week has gone by, and it's all the same stuff that's happening around the world, whether it's Ebola, ISIS, all these wonderful, names we were very, very familiar with. We're going to have a great guest coming on a little bit. But before then, I kind of want to give everyone a little bit of an update. Not sure any of you guys are heading to Prepperfest in Arizona and Scottsdale this weekend. But if you are, I'm actually going to be there. So please stop by and see me. It's going to be at Westworld in North Scottsdale. So again, stop on by. I'll be there. I'm giving away books. You can't. That's the best price, right? Free books. Also, I'd like to, you guys know I have a lot of authors on, and it's for obvious reason. A couple weeks ago, I had my friend on, John Vance, and his book has been doing really, really well. He wanted me to let everybody know that the book is kind of cruising up the charts, and he's really, really happy. And I just wanted to put that out there, that his book, The Death, his debut novel, is doing really good, and if you want to pick up a great post-apocalyptic novel, I definitely encourage you to do that. The Death by John W. Vance. One thing we've really never touched on as far as apocalyptic situations too much, and it's just because there's always been fun things like Ebola to talk about, has been the economy. If I'm sure everyone out there is always paying attention. You notice kind of how the stock market's taking these wild swings, kind of very unpredictable. And we're talking about large swings, triple digits kind of swings. And whether it's up 200 points or the next day it's down 300 points. But there's some interesting data out there that shows that our economy is definitely not as sound as those government entities would let us think that it is. That kind of will just kind of segue into my guest tonight. He's a best-selling author. He's got a great series. Holding Their Own is the name of his series. He's now on to volume 8 of that apocalyptic series. And I've got him here tonight to talk about his books, to talk about all things apocalyptic. His name is Joe Nobody. Joe, are you there?
Michael, it's good to talk to you.
Well, I appreciate having you on. I know you're a busy man. You're out there doing quite a bit. Why don't you, before we kind of dive into some of the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about tonight, why don't you introduce yourself to those people, which I can't believe there would be any of my listeners that don't know who you are, but just in case, why don't you give a little bit more of a background of who you are?
Well, obviously Joe Nobody is a pen name. I've been involved in government service of one form or another, private security. You and I have something in common. We've both done executive security, from what I read. So there's a little bit more to talk about maybe tonight than just authorship, if you will. And I've got involved in the self-reliant lifestyle years ago, even though I'd never heard the term. I live in Houston, Texas, and we have hurricanes, and I've experienced a couple of those firsthand. One time we were without electricity for quite a few days, over 2 weeks. And so anyway, that got me kind of involved in making sure that the homestead was well protected and well stocked, and that I knew how to, what kind of foods to buy and all that sort of thing. And that eventually led me into the self-reliant lifestyle. So anyway, it's just a great pleasure to be with you this evening. I look forward to talking to you about all kinds of things.
Well, great. Why don't you kind of, your books are great, by the way. I first self-published my book, The End, in the spring of 2013, but your books are already out there, and I was already scooping your stuff as far as reading it. It's great stuff, and anyone who hasn't read any of the Holding Their Own series, you got to pick it up. I'll put a link to it on the chat room, as well as there'll be a link on my Facebook page and other social media. Why don't you kind of tell everybody what your series is about?
Holding Their Own series is, some people refer to them as the Bishop and Terry books. It is a married couple. They obviously start off in Houston. There is a economic collapse initiated by what some people have said are some of the most clever terrorist attacks they've ever read in fiction. And anyway, the couple tries to stay in their Houston suburban home. They realized it's untenable. It's just not going to happen. The government's not going to come back. Society's not going to recover. And so they bug out for West Texas. The protagonist has a small piece of property out in the desert that he's used for hunting. And so the first few books are about their adventure trying to survive the trip and then to meet people, set up a homestead, and basically survive. Of course, that would probably, after a few books, you cover that, and so then they actually start, the series starts getting involved in the recovery and how people would reorganize, what the people who are trying to rebuild society, what they would face or possibly encounter. And all throughout the series of books, I try to throw in the prepper that's easy to say, tips and tricks, so that the books are not only enjoyable entertainment, some good action and adventure, but there's also some very helpful little scenarios that people can read about and maybe learn something that might help them one of these days.
Yeah, that's why there's kind of like a new genre that's been created years ago, and I would say it's a fairly new genre. It's called prepper fiction, and your book, easily falls into that, and your series is really becoming a modern classic as far as it pertains to in that genre as well as in the post-apocalyptic genre. So your books. You're dealing you've got multiple things that are happening within the country, and that's why your series is kind of has a very realistic feel to it as far as how things all kind of come crashing down. First, there's kind of this slow economic decay, things are going to hell, and then there's some terrorist attacks and so forth. Where do you? I mean, I know as you're writing the book, sometimes it's either you're writing and you're thinking that this is something that could happen, you truly believe this is your vision of how things will fold out, or do you think that you're just writing an interesting story and using the collapse of the economy as an instrument, or does that make sense?
Yeah, I've always been of the opinion that if, the slim chance that we do slide over the edge would be economically based. Now, what causes the scales to tip? What causes that snowball to start rolling down the hill? That could be any one of a number of things. That could be natural disaster, earthquake, terrorist attack, you name it. War, regional war, broad regional warfare. It could be any number of items, but what will eventually get the average American town, city, state, region, maybe the entire nation, is economic. And that's where it'll hit home. That's when the grocery store shelves will be empty nationwide. That's where the grid could collapse. And so I've always thought that was the most likely scenario. I prep for a little bit more than that. Anything short of nuclear warfare or an asteroid, hitting the Earth and wiping out the species. Anything short of that, I tend to try to prep for. But, excuse me, I think our largest percentage of taking a hit is going to be economically induced.
Yeah, I think I have that belief as well. I obviously think there could be some. I do believe there's some nefarious individuals out there that would like to do us harm. And I always have these visions of different weapon systems being utilized. But the economy, if you just look at it, that's kind of what I mentioned really quickly. You look at the stock market, and there's always that theory the stock market is essentially supposed to be indicative, kind of like looking out the future, like 6 months to a year out in the future of how we are economically. and it's just has taken some wild swings. And I've talked to a lot of people that are much more knowledgeable than I am on the economy, and the one thing they always tell me is that we've really never truly recovered from the incident that happened in 2008. And then they actually then take it even further back. It says the main issue in our economy, and when it does collapse, that's what they always say, when it does collapse, it's because we've never truly deleveraged ourselves. We're a country that's, whether it's our government down to each individual, is pretty much in debt. What do you think is what do you think will be the catalyst that will tip the economy over?
Oh, well, I have no idea. We mentioned some. I'll tell you an interesting exercise that I went through years and years ago was after 9/11. I was required professionally to read some pretty intense sections of the after-action reports and the 9/11 Commission reports. And I think what the average American doesn't realize is how close we were after those terrorist attacks to those economic scales tipping badly. The federal government stepped in and did some interesting things. The Federal Reserve Board, which is completely separate from the federal government, stepped in and did some interesting things. A lot of private enterprise stepped in and made sure, kind of shored up the walls, if you will. And if you think about our economy at that time was booming. There was job growth, there was good GDP growth, unemployment was low, debt ratios were much better than what they are today, both at the household, the city, the state, the federal levels. We were really in a strong economic upturn when those terrorist attacks happened. And if you ever go out to any of the federal websites and look at economic indicators and activity through that historical period, you'll see this marked downward sharp angle on the bar graphs or the charts, indicating a lot of different things. And the 9/11 Commission report spells it out. We were perilously close. A lot closer than what a lot of people know. And so then if you take that and you say, okay, let's say something like that happens now. Let's say that there is a significant terrorist attack on the infrastructure. One of my books, Apocalypse Drift, it's actually the Chinese do a cyber attack against the IRS. And the federal government can't pay its bills for a month and everybody goes nuts. By the way, my website for that book was attacked out of Beijing with a denial of service attack 2 weeks after it came out and made the Amazon charts. I think I made about 7 billion people mad, or I'm sorry, not 7 billion, a couple billion people mad. But anyway, back to the conversation. So it could be any number of things that a large earthquake in California could send us over the edge. I mean, the big one that they've been talking about for the last, 50 years, that could do it. It doesn't have to be man-made. It doesn't have to be terrorist. It doesn't have to be a bad decision by government. It could be a natural disaster. I think Katrina, if Katrina would have come on to the Texas coast and hit Houston dead center like it hit New Orleans and all of our refining infrastructure that we have down here along our coast, that might have sent shockwaves through the economic system a little bit more than even what it did. So it could be anything, but eventually when we can't go to the store and buy bread, or the bread that is in the store is so hyper expensive, we're like Germany in the 1930s, and people are wheeling in a wheelbarrow full of Deutschmarks to try to buy a loaf of bread. That's going to be economic, and that's where a lot of people are going to be glad that they're preppers.
Yeah, there was, with all this Ebola stuff. Speaking of preppers, there's been a lot of focus on survivalists and preppers and whatnot, and a lot of articles now being put out by mainstream media there was something about like I think it was on Freedom Prepper's website. I might have seen it or somewhere, and it was discussing the actual percentage of people that. So you have a population of over 315 million, give or take, in the United States, and something around only 3 million people are preppers. I don't know where that number actually lies, if it's correct or not, or if it's less than that or greater than that or right on the mark. I have no idea. But even if it is off by, say, 2 million, so say it's 5 million, that's not a lot of people that are ready. And that leaves a lot of people that aren't. And when something happens, that leads me back to this thought. I think it's not really the event. I've always believed this, and I've said this many times. It's people's reaction to an event that brings about the apocalypse. Because if we were all ready and prepared, and something happened, and we all worked together to make sure that we can get on the other side of it, things would be okay. But I think you can obviously answer this. If something like that happens, do you actually believe it would spell the collapse of our society?
I think it's possible that it would spell the collapse of our society. And I'm not the first guy to point this out. There have been numerous experts and authors and researchers that have talked about the effect of just-in-time inventory on our supply systems, what you and I would probably call logistics. There have been numerous people that have talked about how fragile our grids are. And if you look at Katrina and you take the U.S. Gulf Coast as a kind of an average slice of American society, an average slice of preparedness, a mean average of income and capability and wherewithal and education, that's a little America along that Gulf Coast. I lived down here. I saw it. I was right in the middle of it, a lot of it when it was happening. And I could, if the federal response and the state response had not been what it was, I could see New Orleans going into anarchy. I could see that whole area down along the Gulf Coast sliding off the edge. It didn't. Matter of fact, most of what everybody heard going on at that particular point in time was media hype and greatly exaggerated. It didn't, but that was also because there were literally thousands and thousands and thousands of volunteers and rescue workers. And I remember the sky of New Orleans, I was worried that the helicopters were going to slam into each other. There were so many. There were Coast Guard helicopters. There were National Guard helicopters. There were Army helicopters. There were news helicopters. There were airplanes flying around. And so when the desperate, hungry, frightened, unprepared citizen can look up in the sky and they see all of these helicopters all over the place in their city, well, that kind of gives them a little bit of hope. And I also believe that the average person in New Orleans and southern Louisiana understood that it was just them, that help was coming, that the rest of the country was okay. Now, if we were in a situation where you didn't know help was coming, if the average unprepared citizen, that other 310 million that you're talking about, doesn't believe anymore that the government's going to bail them out or that other people or charities or churches or whatever are going to help them out, then I can see it sliding off. I can see it sliding off pretty easy, especially in the densely populated areas. I'm sure you've traveled between Baltimore and Boston. There's places in there where you can't tell where one city ends and the other one begins. There are a lot of people in there. Same with the southern to western tip of Lake Michigan. Same with some of, from San Jose up to Oakland and San Francisco. You just can't tell where one city ends. It's extremely dense population. And if there's something that knocks down the grid and people don't have food and you've got that many folks and that small of an area, I can see it sliding off. I can see it happening.
Now, are some of your response based on just looking at and your own experiences, or being in what you do for a living? Are these conversations happening as far as you and these other other men and women you might work with talk about events that we have on our books, or that other authors or other movies that are out there? Do you guys actually have these conversations?
If you're talking about professionally well, I'll tell you a story. Just kind of maybe we'll answer that question. Some years ago, I was in doing some instruction in a extended tactical rifle course, and there was this was a course that was full of law enforcement, both at the federal and at the city levels. We had some SWAT team guys in there. There were some of the State Department asset protection guys. There were some of the instructors up from Fleet C that was going through this course. And you know how those go. Afterwards, after you've went through all the exercises and done the drills, the guys kind of sit around. Sometimes there's a little bonfire or a grill running or a little fire pit or whatever, and they're cleaning rifles and they're reloading magazines, and it's kind of just a chill out, unwind from the day, uncoil a little bit. And I was at one of those, and these were some very serious individuals at this particular class, and the topic came up. They bounced around a lot of things. I was kind of shocked to hear these federal guys, and I'm sure you've been around them. They're normally very tight-lipped and extremely stoic. But the topics came up, and one of the topics was, would you confiscate firearms if the need be, if the order came? And I was quite surprised by the response that everybody did, assuming that there were other questions that went around of, if the situation in New Orleans after Katrina, and there were a lot of people there, if the situation in New Orleans after Katrina, if that was widespread, if that was the entire eastern seaboard, and do you think that we could hold the line? Do you think that they would have to bring in the Guard and then federalize troops or use federal troops? So yeah, those conversations do occur. I don't know that any human being in the United States who attends a movie or reads books or, regardless of whether they're in the Secret Service or the State Department or the Pentagon or, if they work for, Mr. Prince, it doesn't matter what really their profession is. If you go to movies or you watch television or you read books or you do research into places like Somalia or Mogadishu, if you go Bosnia, places like that, if you research those and learn lessons from those places, Libya now is a new one. Syria, I'm sure, will be in all of the training classes as soon as a lot of facts start rolling through. If you study those places, and that's part of your profession, you can't help but talk about those things. You can't help but talk about those scenarios. Now, I will say, more and more, I have seen an attitude from the law enforcement side that they feel like their authority is a given, that that when they pull anything from pulling over a speeder to searching for that guy up in the woods in Pennsylvania, Eric Frayne, I think his name is, to whatever law enforcement's doing, they have gotten a little fat and happy, if you ask me. They feel like their authority is ingrained almost in modern society. I don't know what causes that. I don't know what that effect is, but I have seen that going on a little bit. And I think if there ever is the beginning steps of anarchy in American society, I think local law enforcement's probably going to be the first ones that get a great big surprise.
A surprise in what manner?
I think that so many people underestimate the violence that other human beings are capable of. When I'm talking to preppers and when I'm doing more of a technical presentation or a technical talk, one of the things I always point out is the average American underestimates how violent other human beings can be. Unless you've been in combat, unless you've been in some of the overseas situation, we have been been blessed with excellent law enforcement, excellent courts, excellent prosecutors, infrastructure, the feds reinforcing where they need to. The average American's obviously not seen a civil war for going on 150 years, maybe a little over 150 years now, I guess. My math's okay. So we've not been exposed to that. We're not used to that as a society. And yet, if, as I'm sure you've experienced, if you were in Syria right now, you would be stunned at what men are capable of doing to each other in a combat or in a war or in a strife or in that type of situation. And I think American society as a whole underestimates that, mainly just because they've just not seen it.
Yeah, I actually would agree with that point. I think a lot of people listen to the show and read our books are obviously kind of in tune to that, but I think that's a very slim slice of kind of society. But I think a majority of society, obviously, look how politically correct they are. They look at how they just like you can't even. It's bad words hurt them now. We used to have the whole thing. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me kind of thing. But now you can't even say certain words without them getting all upset. And imagine what are those people going to do when all hell breaks loose and no one's there to protect them? No one's going to be there to protect them. It's just not going to happen.
It's called the thin blue line for a reason. And in some places it's thinner than others, but yeah, I agree. I was a long time ago. I was doing an interview, and the guy wanted to play what if scenarios. He was kind of in the first stages of embracing the self-reliance lifestyle, and so for his listeners, he wanted to play the what if scenarios, and he said, I'm in a brick home. It's well secured. I've got heavy duty locks. I've got storm shutters or bars on the window. There's, I have, you're the bad guy, Joe. I have what you want, medical supplies or food or whatever inside the house. So pretend you're the bad guy. What would you do? And I said, I'd go down the street, hotwire a truck, and drive the thing through your front door. And he was like, you do what? I said, what? You think I'm going to stand out in your front yard and yell at you? You think I'm going to, take pot shots and try to hit you through the window and waste ammunition? If I can find a bulldozer, I'm going to knock a whole corner off of your house. Whatever I can find that will bust through. And he's like, well, wow, I never thought of that. Where did you learn that? I said, well, when you've watched Humvees and strikers push open these heavy iron gates in Baghdad, and then the breachers pour in, I said it kind of gives you some ideas. That's an everyday occurrence, and at that time the Iraq War was still going on. That's an everyday occurrence in cities and towns all across the Middle East. That's no big deal. That's nothing creative. They do it all the time, and he was just like amazed. And some of the callers into the program were like, man, Joe, I hope you're on our side if things ever do go south. And I'm like, guys, this is nothing. You wouldn't believe what some of these people will do to each other. So, that just kind of has always reinforced when I give a class and I tell people, hey, you're ducking down behind that little piece of cover. You're ducking down by the window frame. Let me tell you something. If I've got a rifle and I'm out in your yard and I want in your house, I'm just going to chew through that wall. I'm just going to knock blocks out and cut through the bricks and cut through the plaster. I'm not just going to shoot at your head as it pops around and takes pot shots at me. I'm just going to saw your house down. I'm going to be the big bad wolf if I've got enough ammo. And they're like, they don't believe how mean that is. Some of them, it's kind of funny.
Yeah, and things would get vicious. And the thing is, there's not as if there's a lack of information out there, and obviously we've got the modern history of warfare, but you can go back to I years ago I did a lot of reading of World War II accounts, personal accounts, not just kind of like from a historian, but accounts from Marines kind of fighting in the Pacific, and just how brutal it was, both American and Japanese, and what they were doing to one another.
Oh,
just absolutely brutal. So people will absolutely, they lose their humanity when they start fighting.
Oh, one of my favorite uncles, great uncle, actually survived Bougainville. Don't know how much you know about that little lovely piece of real estate, but in World War II. But he was in his 80s, very near the end, before he began to finally talk about things a little bit. And, of course, anybody who studied the history of the Pacific Campaign is familiar with what the troops were going through at a high level. But to hear it from a guy who had been there, like you said, a personal account, I agree. And those guys had for the most part, semi-automatic Grands, with a very limited capacity magazine. Yes, there were some automatic weapons. Yes, there were some machine guns. They really weren't very prevalent. Artillery was smaller, armor was smaller and much less efficient. And yet, you're right, that got vicious. There was no humanity. There was no mercy. It was all out. Everything you can bring, every ounce of energy in your cells was out to kill the other guy. And I think sometimes we lose sight of what our fellow human beings, we don't like it. We wish it wasn't so. I wish it wasn't so. I hope my son or daughter never has to face warfare or combat. But it's there. It's a fact. It's part of the species. It's 150,000 years of Darwinism, if you believe that way.
Yeah. So I want to Ebola's been kind of in the headlines, and God, I can't seem to stop having it come up in a conversation pretty much every time I'm on the show. But I personally, unless it becomes aerosol and goes somehow mutates where it's like that, and you're getting it airborne wise, I'm not overly concerned with it. What concerns me personally about the Ebola outbreak is if it gets to Central America, right? And if it gets to Central America, if you look at a lot of Central American countries, their infrastructure for healthcare, while it is better, without a doubt, better than what they have in West Africa, it doesn't necessarily, if they have a massive outbreak down there, we could be having troubles here. And this goes back to the conversation we were having at the beginning and near the top of the hour of an economic collapse. Imagine a massive outbreak of Ebola in Central America, and then instead of having tens of thousands, we have tens of millions of migrants fleeing for their lives. And I can understand, I would probably do the exact same thing. I would get the hell out of Dodge and go where? I'd come to the United States, try to get to Canada or something, try to go to a first world nation so that I'm protected, and or try to make sure I get health care. That, I think, would be the tipping point for us. I think if you had tens of millions of refugees just instantly flooding across the southern border, I think that could be the beginning of the end as far as from an economic collapse standpoint.
Michael, you and I share the same strategic worries, for lack of a better term, concerns on that topic. I'm with you. I think about 90% of what we're hearing about Ebola is media ratings hype. I I think it's wise for the average American to keep an eye on it. I think it's wise for the average American to read about it and learn about it. I don't think anybody should stay home from work, or anybody should change their daily routine due to a fear of Ebola, at least not at this time. Now, that being said, if it does morph, if it does mutate into something that's airborne, like you said, now I'm worried a little bit. Now I'm maybe taking some extra precautions, or maybe modifying. I might not go to the mall. I might not go to the gun show, just for that. But those two examples I just used, you're right, that hits the economy. I'm talking about Central America. I think that eventually you'd have the 7th Cav and out of Fort Hood rolling towards the border if it got into the hundreds of thousands. I might be absolutely wrong about that, but we would definitely take a hit from having to deploy military assets, and there would still be people sneak across. Some of those might be sick. Could that tip us? Yeah, you might be right. I don't say it's impossible. That's for sure. We've seen crazier stuff happen.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's I just look at the current administration, and I just don't know if they would actually deploy the military to the border. I don't know if it's, because the way things sometimes roll out, I always like I like to try to gather as much information and look at things scientifically and just try to make sure everything comes in without just making a judgment call. And as you look at however they're handling anything in government, and, being in the military, then I did government contract work, etc. I kind of got a little inside view on kind of how things run, and it's very bloated. Bureaucracy is just kind of a joke in some ways, and they definitely, I don't think you at the higher echelons in the bureaucracy, there's the best and brightest that are there. I think the best and brightest go to work in private sector jobs, but they just either are, the way they're handling situations now, if they're either incompetent or they're deliberately allowing things to happen. It's one or the other, because just the way, and maybe it's optics for how this Ebola thing was handled and how it's still being handled. This is me, and I think a lot of people share this view. It's either they're grossly incompetent, or this is a deliberate thing to try to introduce this to the nation. What are your thoughts on that, how the CDC has kind of handled themselves with the very small outbreak we have in the United States right now?
Oh, I've been very disappointed, and I hate to keep. I think about other things, by the way. I hate to keep bringing this up, but that was one of the grossest examples of mismanagement that I've seen since the initial response to Katrina, which was pretty bad. It amazes me, and I've still got questions that I've never seen anybody answer. I've never seen. They say it's not aerosol transmitted, yet why? If it's not, why is there a 3-foot zone supposedly? And if it is transmitted in a sneeze, I know a sneeze travels 15 feet. You can look up YouTube videos in nice slow motion that shows a radius of 15 feet for a sneeze. I wonder about why no one's brought up the fact that the Ebola virus stays active in male sperm for up to 60 days. What's going on with that? Why is that different? That's a body fluid, I understand it. But I also am curious about perspiration. Is it, if I have Ebola and I'm sweating and I shake my hair like I do sometimes to get the sweat off of my head, and my sweat flies 8 feet or 4 feet or 3 feet, is there active virus in that? Is that contagious? So a lot of the things that the CDC has done and said and came out with I think they had way too much. Let's keep everybody calm. Let's be reassuring in their press releases and press conferences and what the government was saying. And they also had way too much of the average Americans too dumb to understand. And I don't know about you, Michael, but I don't like it when somebody tells me I'm too dumb to understand. Sometimes they might be right, but I don't want to be told that.
Yeah, I think people are looking just, I think most people are just looking just to be talked to straight. But then again, the government just doesn't do that anymore. There's just, I think there's just desire to just keep us dumb and happy, or as happy as we can be, being dumb and stuffed with GMO foods and watching garbage TV and all this other crap that's out there. And they just kind of talk to us and pander to us, instead of just being straight about kind of, giving some real answers. And it leaves me personally just skeptical of the entire thing. And I'm skeptical of the entire power structure itself personally. And that goes by whether it's private or governmental. I mean, I think sometimes when things get too big, without a doubt, whenever things get too big, they become corrupt. It's without a doubt, they just become corrupt, and kind of the system kind of turns, and instead of it serving us as it's supposed to in our republic, we are now supposed to serve them. And that's just kind of where the system's gone now.
I have become a political agnostic. And I often make the joke, I'm not bigoted against or for conservatives or liberals. I hate them all equally. I've watched a Republican administration throw a very honorable, cost-saving, life-saving organization like Blackwater or Triple Canopy or Aegis out of the UK under the bus to save themselves. That was W's administration. That was a Republican administration. I watched, and some of it's just now coming out, lie after deception, after cover-up, come out of the second Gulf War, OIF. I have seen with my own eyes example after example where both Democrats and Republicans have just done things that are, in my book, where I'm from, they're dishonorable. And yeah, I know politicians are always going to be snidely. I know there's always going to be a level of greasiness in there. Hey, I got to ask you a question real quick. If I use the term oil can Harry, are you old enough to know what I'm talking about?
It sounds familiar, yeah.
It was a cartoon character on a cartoon called Mighty Mouse. I used that term to describe a politician not too long ago, and everybody looked at me like I was from Mars or something. I guess they were all too young. But anyway, so I'm a political agnostic. I think the system is broken. I have no faith in it anymore. I also have great issue with elected prosecutors. I have really great issue with some of the judicial system. The federal government's too big. It's too powerful. It was never meant to be that way. I can't tell you what the answer is. I'm not saying we all take up pitchforks and torches and go march on Washington. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm with you. I think the system's broke. And I think a lot of the readers of our books believe the system's broke as well. I think that's kind of our core audience that maybe is agreeing with us, if you will, by buying both of our books.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think also where our books appeal to our base are people that there's an anxiety that exists out there. And again, there's this wide canopy of individuals that are all from different kinds of political spectrums, race, creeds, and whatnot. But they all have one thing that's universal, and I think it's this very deep down distrust of authority, which they should have, and just they're anxious. They look at what's happening, and it's just one incompetent or deliberate, event after another. We just go from one crisis to another crisis. It's like this is how they govern anymore. And again, I I don't know the answer because I don't sit there at the helm. And I like to have a certain amount of evidence before I start saying certain things. But without a doubt, when you boil things down to their common denominator, it is either gross incompetence because the system is just bloated and fat and grotesque bureaucracy that we have, or it's a deliberate function that's underway. But either way, whether it's incompetence or it's done deliberately, it's unsustainable, is my view.
I agree. And I think there's more and more of us that feel that way. And again, I want to state this very clearly. I'm not an anarchist. I don't want the end of society to come. I know there are those individuals out there who kind of silently chuckle or grin and say, yeah, well, if the zombie war started tomorrow, I wouldn't be heartbroken. Well, I've kind of seen and been in places where society has collapsed, and I don't want my family to go through that no matter how well prepped we are. My mother and father are both still alive, and they're getting up there a little bit. I don't know what they would do. The elderly population, things like that. Suffering is never good. But on the other hand, this just, as you put it, it's not sustainable. It can't keep going like this. It's getting worse, and I've got answers. I would love to be king for a day. Did you ever play that game when you were younger? Or
yeah, well, no, without a doubt. Oh, no, without a doubt. Well, then my guest last week, Kate Morris, I asked her that question. So I'll give you. You want to play a little game?
Sure, let's play a game.
All right. So what I did with her, because I've done this too, is like that king for a day. Because I've often thought, so what if you Joe Nobody was dictator for a year? What exactly would you do? What would be your first action?
So the first thing I would do for the United States of America, and this is going to sound capitalistic, but I have an ulterior motive. The first thing I would do for the United States of America is I would implement the tax code or the tax system that I described in probably too much detail in the book Apocalypse Draft. There is, and I had that tax system verified by 2 PhDs in economics. One of them was a professor at a significant university, and it is real. It would work. There's no reason why it wouldn't work. And basically what you have is you would have where no American would pay income tax or no American corporation would pay income tax. And you say, well, you can't cut the government down that much. No, I'm not cutting the government at all. There is a way that the U.S. government, can raise the exact same amount of money, $3.6 trillion a year that they do right now, without any of us paying any income tax or any other extra tax. Part of that income would be, I would then solve the immigration issue. And how I would solve that is I would sell citizenship, just like Germany does, just like Canada does, just like a lot of countries on the planet do. Anybody that wants to come here, you want to come here, you're not a criminal, you're not a terrorist. 3 days, I'll give you a green card. You pay 28% of your income in taxes. If you can't, you don't like it, you can't pay taxes, you don't want to stay, fine, leave. But as long as you'll pay that income tax rate and keep your nose clean, after 10 years, I'll grant you citizenship. The same with students. I'm going to put foreign exchange students, I'm going to put a surcharge on what they do. If they want to become citizens after 10 years, great. You pay in so much money, you get your citizenship. Does that sound cheap? Does that sound commercial? Maybe, but boy, anything else we're doing isn't working. I live in Texas. Mrs. Nobody works at a Texas school. I see this, hear this, experience this every day. As I drive to my office, my publisher's office here in town, I go through 2 areas where there is commonly 50 to 70 men standing on each side of the road, day laborers. Our laborers. They don't speak English. The stores around those areas have now had to bar their windows. There's constantly police cars there. So anyway, I would fix immigration. That would be with the tax code change. That would be one of the next things I would do. Second thing.
So let me just jump in here real fast. So as far as if you're eliminating the income tax, which by the way I would love to eliminate, I think the income tax is punitive and it punishes you for your labor. I think the income tax is total BS. But so I'm interested exactly how do you raise the revenue?
Okay, so I lined out the percentages exactly when I wrote Apocalypse Drift, but that was a few years ago. But approximately about 15% of the revenue would come from the immigration taxes. Then the second thing where you would get taxes is right now the Federal Reserve prints money and it gives it or sells it. It really gives it these days to the banks. Everybody thinks that the U.S. government prints money and then spends it. They do not. They don't do that at all. The Federal Reserve prints money and sells it to the banks. Now, sometimes they print money and buy government bonds with it, but basically most of the money is just really kind of given to the banks. Well, in my scenario, you get rid of the Federal Reserve. The U.S. Treasury prints its own money again, and we have done this numerous times in our history as a country. And if the banks need extra currency, if the banks need cash flow increased to expand the economy, then they buy it from the U.S. government, not from the Federal Reserve Board. If you've ever heard Ron Paul talk about where is the missing $13 trillion, and when he's talking about the Federal Reserve, this has all been a part of the libertarian argument for quite a while. And so in my scenario, let's say the U.S. economy is growing at 2%. You want somebody to print 2% more money to keep things level, to keep things even. And in my scenario, the U.S. government would print that 2% and spend it. It goes out into the economy. It goes out. You wouldn't have inflation. There'd be no massive inflation. The economy expanded at 2%, print 2% more money. That's part of your budget, federal government. And then finally, the last part of my plan was for every that banks would pay 0.5% on every dollar of interest money they collected. So rather than taxing individuals on their income, you would put 0.5% premium on every credit, on every debtor, and that would give you the progressive amount of taxes being paid, if you will. Rich people tend to borrow more money for their projects or their homes or whatever than poorer people do, and so if you tack on 0.5% on debt, on the bank debt, then richer people would pay more than poorer people tend to do. And if you take all of those methods of income at current today levels, the U.S. government would raise just as much money as what they collect off of individuals and corporations today. It comes out to about $3.6 trillion, and not a one of us would pay a dime in income taxes. But you know what the really important part of that tax plan is every corporation in the world would be at least sorely tempted to jump on that. Every corporation out there would say, what? You've got the U.S. infrastructure, labor force, technology grid, justice system. You've got all of this in the U.S. and there's no income taxes? Sign me up, dude. And that, I think, would put a boost into our economy that would just be off the scale, I think. And I wasn't alone in this. The PhD economics professionals that I bounced this off of, they said it was brilliant, that they didn't see any reason why it wouldn't work.
Well, anything that can get rid of the federal income tax, that'd be I'm always willing to listen. What would the state? We're kind of running low on time, but real quick, give me kind of 1 minute. What would the states do? How would the states raise their money?
Well, that'd be up to the states. The states are raising their money now, and I'm not saying that the federal help that the states get would go away. Again, I'm not changing any federal spending with this, other than eliminating the IRS. We wouldn't need them anymore, or at least nearly as big apparatus.
Oh my God, I would love to eliminate. You want to talk about a terrorist organization?
Oh. Don't get me started, brother.
They are literally. I mean, if you ask anybody, who would you rather be contacted by a member of ISIS or a member of the IRS? I think most people would probably want to be contacted by ISIS. I mean, the IRS is like the biggest set of jackbooted thugs there is. Now, I'm probably lining myself up for an audit right now, but
I might argue that the ATF is competing with. But you're right. There's definitely a power grid there. But anyway, so we would get rid of the IRS with this, which I think is an automatic selling point right there off the top.
Well, to libertarians and certain conservatives would love to do it, but then you have a certain obviously political party that is in love with the IRS, and I use it as a way to intimidate the other political party and try to silence them. So, hey, Joe, we're kind of starting to run low on time. Why don't you tell everybody where they can contact you, where they can get your books, etc.?
Well, the books are available, I think, just about everywhere, especially in all of the online distributors, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Amazon, obviously, for sure. iTunes, pretty much any place that sells ebooks or where you can order paperbacks online, you can get them. They are carried in some Barnes & Noble stores. They're also carried in some Walmart stores. But mainly folks buy them online, both either paperback or ebook. You can always get a hold of me. I've got a website where I write a lot of prepper articles and do equipment reviews and a lot of free stuff, and there's a contact on there that goes to me, and it is www.joenobodybooks.com. All one word, all together, no spaces, dashes, underscores, or any of that. So joenobodybooks.com.
Got it. And I posted it, so.
All right.
And hey, Joe, I think we've run out of time. Thanks for coming on, and everybody out there, stay frosty.